Humanianity, a new religious call. Humanity, religion for us all. Humanity, now we all can see. Humanity, how much better we can be. Hi, I'm Bill Van Fleet, and this is Humanianity Conversation number 31, recorded on September 11th, 2019. It is the 12th recorded conversation with my friend Steve Rast. We talked about the continuing problem of the difficulty in productive dialogue between individuals with different beliefs, and about the problem that sometimes those beliefs can make a substantial difference with regard to how one feels. In the area of religion, this difficulty is being addressed to some extent by the various interfaith movements. We also talked about the anti-religious movement within some Western cultures, about the good and bad in the religions, and about an appropriate definition of religion, including whether it should be defined by its content or by its function or functions. We talked about the negative effect of punishment on the quality of our lives and about alternative, better approaches to non-optimal behaviors. And we talked about the inadequacies of language in the conveying of meaning, including the use of much metaphor, as is done much more in poetry than in technical communication, where precise meaning is so important. Hi.
Hi, we're together. Gosh, it's been a month or more.
Yeah.
New computer. Hopefully it's going to be much better. It was blazingly fast last night, so we shall see.
Yes,
and
well, yeah.
I've got it on Ethernet. I'm off the wireless, so that should also be better. So, okay.
Yeah.
Camera's working. Everything worked. I checked everything out. So anyway, we're in good shape, I think.
Yes, and you can see me and hear me. Okay,
I can see you, and it just came up, bam, just like that.
Yeah, I noticed that.
So
really
new
great.
Computer made all the difference, I guess. I'd been blaming it on Comporium, but anyway.
Have you had any thoughts about what today's conversation might be about?
I don't know. I was just at a meeting of the Children of Abraham here in York County, kind of an interfaith organization. It's Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and Baha'i. So we were talking about this interfaith stuff, and and that's very much where I think Humanianity is, as far as I understand it, about the religions, is having the various religions come together and talk and discuss, and not as much maybe dwell on our differences, but to recognize those differences. One of the members today said that yes, he used the term, kind of a Christian term, I guess, but he said, we need to recognize our demons, and and we need to speak those, and I think he was right about that. But it's interesting,
speak them. What does that mean?
Voice them, put the word out, essentially, about things that are, because we kind of agreed, and I think it's true, Bill, that there's not a lot of overt religious discrimination, I don't guess, but there's a lot of covert where folks, especially when they're sort of in their own quote unquote tribe, speak in a way that they don't speak when they're in a larger setting or anything. And so we kind of discussed that. And actually, I was telling them, now this was 30 years ago I became Catholic, but back then the Catholics were very much in a minority here in Rock Hill. They're not as much so now, but I guess they would still be considered minority versus, say, the the Protestant Christians. And you got, yeah, some folks, they were, why did you do that? Well, if you were going to change from Methodist, why didn't you just be Episcopalian? And Houston used to, you know, jibe at me a lot about, becoming Catholic. And he does that a little bit in the class sometimes, but kind of good naturedly, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that thing of how do we, how do we come together and talk with each other honestly, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's still a challenge, I think. We were talking today, and the Muslims, of course, don't eat pork.
Mm-hmm.
So we're having this sort of Thanksgiving thing, but we're doing it on November 14th. Yeah, I think that's the week before Thanksgiving. And and the Muslims, at least what we were told in their own community, is they don't like calling it Thanksgiving because that's more of a kind of American holiday. And some of the Muslims are basically immigrants. They didn't grow up in the United States. And so we were trying to figure that out. And we kind of came up with an evening for gratefulness. And that seemed to please so you can kind of come to a consensus sometimes about these things. But, some people probably would have just got all head up about that and said, well, it's Thanksgiving. It's America, live as an American. And that gets you nowhere when you do that, of course, because then you just alienate yourself. Yeah. So maybe, I don't know if that's worth a discussion or not, but that's on my mind right now because I just came out of that meeting and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's extremely important, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about it also. The thing that comes to mind is in our Tuesday meeting in Charlotte, Humanianity, there is this other person, Mark, that has certainly substantially different beliefs about the nature of the world and so forth than I do. But we are indeed working together and do not have difficulty talking with each other. But that it is not at all unusual, of course, that when people have different opinions, at least about certain kinds of things, then that tends to generate a struggle for dominance with anger and perhaps then abandonment of the relationship, or at least the interaction at that point in time. And of course, if we look at the so we can see the that there is a fork in the road that can be taken when there is difference of opinion, and one fork is sitting around the conference table, so to speak, and trying to understand each other and come to some kind of agreement, and the other is to go to war to see who can win, who can dominate the other, and so forth. And the war, that's can be metaphorical, two individuals can go to war with each other and so forth. And of course that's reflected to a great extent in the chapter on rational ethical anger prevention in book 1 that's on the website free to everyone and so on. But I also think that a very helpful distinction to make is between existential beliefs and ethical beliefs. What I've found is that people have some difficulty seeing what to me seems to be a very useful and understandable distinction. Existential beliefs being beliefs about existence, having nothing to do with existentialism, but beliefs about what exists or has existed in the past or is likely to exist in the future, and how it all works. What if it operates according to rules? What those rules are, and so forth. So those are the ises and ares and were and so forth. And then ethical beliefs are beliefs that at least could be restated in the form of a sentence that has the word should in it. I should do this, we should do that, we should not do such and such, you should not do so and so, you should not have done such and such, etc. And the important effort, well, one of the basic, one of the bases on which the concept of humanianity rests as being a good thing is that we humans cause so much pain, suffering, disability, and early death by what we decide to do at all levels. Our own lifestyles, what we do to ourselves, how we relate to each other with relationship breakdown, and the we being our most feared predator, and international warfare, and so forth. So the idea of humanianity is that perhaps we are getting to the point now with our intellectual capabilities of developing some ethical. Um, you're having some music.
Yeah, that's the phone ringing. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But we can still talk.
Yeah, it's okay. So we can develop increasingly some ethical principles and rules of conduct that guide us to do differently than what some of the stuff in us would have us do, stuff that is there by virtue of evolution. Hominids struggle for dominance and fight and engage in tribalism and so forth.
Yeah.
And so that has to do with our ethics. In other words, improving our ethics. And of course, the existential beliefs are important in the development of ethics. But we know that we can be wrong about our existential beliefs and not know it, or right about them and not know it, and so on. And that working on increasingly accurate existential beliefs is a good thing, but agreement is not a requirement in order to work on an ethical philosophy. And so the religions basically are our adult effort to work on becoming better people, becoming good people. And so there are multiple sets of existential beliefs that vary from religion to religion and from person to person. So the religions should be a place for people to come together and think more deeply about the important questions in life and so on. But there's another issue that complicates the whole thing, and that is that how we feel is dependent to a certain extent on what we believe. And so it can be that a person having a belief in a particular, having a particular, say, existential belief may help that person to feel really good and help the person feel good in a time of difficulty. And yet suppose somebody believes that existential belief is incorrect. Well, under what circumstances should one let the other person know, hey, I think you're making a mistake, even though it makes you feel good? That's a very difficult problem.
It is, yeah. Yeah, it's I think in interreligious dialogue, especially even in ecumenical dialogue too, to some degree. I mean, you you have your stance that you're coming from, and so you don't want just kind of a kind of a synchronicity, I guess. You want to, because to be honest, you have to be where you are, and then be open to where the other person is, or the other persons you're talking to, and that's difficult. We talked today about the fact that we're often in these groups like this, these religious interfaith groups. We're often just we're just speaking or talking with the choir. I mean, people come to these things because they're naturally inclined to come to these kinds of events, and but what we were talking about today is broadening that out. And so one thing I suggested is, well, this grateful thing we're doing, I'm going to invite the Rock Hill atheist groups, and they were very open to that. So so it's not just the children of Abraham, it's all of these. I mean, just anybody, sort of like the banquet there in one of Jesus's parables, go out to the hinterlands and bring them in. So I'm going to try to do that, and maybe even expand it out beyond York County. I mean, I've got contacts in Wendy does Tilbury in Gaston County, and maybe we'll get a few Gaston people to trek down to over the county border. And there's some folks in Chester that were there today, Chester County down below us, and some of them are coming. So it will be kind of interesting. What we're going to do is bring people in, and then try to get people to sit with folks that they're not just naturally connected to. So as Presbyterians come, we're thinking, well, let's make it so all the Presbyterians, because you go to those kind of things, and that's what happens. Everybody, the Presbyterians sit at one table, and the Methodists at another, and the Muslims at another. So to try to figure out some ways to get people sitting, so that they're talking to other, other people outside their own tradition. So I think that will be good. And the more of this kind of stuff we can do, I think the better. But it's difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we're still a little tribal, I guess.
A little.
Well, we don't want to be, too pejorative, I guess.
Yeah.
That's one thing I found about the Baha'is, is that they're just very open to almost, well, certainly to all the religions. I mean, when we have devotions, we read from all the different Hindu, Buddhism, Muslim, Christianity, Judaism, and some of the Baha'i writings, but it's kind of a mixture, and all the religions, I think. Now, some people disagree with me on this, but I think all the religions essentially have a similar, foundation, and all of them originally, and I've said this before, but all of them originally, I think, were primarily about practices, and prayer and that sort of thing, and coming together in fellowship and that sort of thing. And then they go along, and then it gets a little into the culture, because religion is a cultural kind of thing. And then you get all the rules and regulations, and like the Muslims don't eat pork, and and all of this, and then it gets all tangled up. But originally, I think all the religions that I've read, anyway, when you read some of the more foundational documents, they're just about people getting in touch with themselves, and when you do that, I think you get in touch with for lack of a better term, reality. And some people might call it divine reality. Some people might just say reality, truth. But I think that's what all the religions are about originally. And we should be able to come together and and it acknowledged that we're all seeking. And most people that get involved in religion, I've found in one way or another, they are who, like you say, live a better life.
You broke up.
Live a life
Open
to reality.
You broke up. You broke up. Can you
Okay.
repeat what you just said?
Well, coming together and experiencing each other in fellowship, getting in touch. Well, what was it that Socrates said? Plato, writing in the guise that one of the most important things is to know thyself. And so getting to know, and when you do that, when you touch that deeper part of yourself, you're really touching all of reality and all the other people out there, I think. And at least that's what I find in my experience.
Okay.
Well, so I think that's what most of the religion.
Yeah, it broke up a little bit, and that most of the religions are about.
Yeah,
is that what?
Yeah. Most of the religions, I think, are about that touching, and we put different, because you can't conceptualize it very well. But, we put terms like God and the divine and the holy and the sacred and love and all those things. But it's about that experience that is a pretty common experience, I think.
Okay, well, let's back up for a minute, because I think you're talking about something very important. But you and I think, have a different way of speaking about it and conceptualizing it and so forth. And there is a little bit of difference in our ways of looking at what the religions are. I think that is an important thing. When you were describing what the religions are, you used a fair number of metaphoric terms and so on. And I try to be more clear about, well, what is it we're talking about? So let me again present that the religions primarily are our adult effort, a part of the culture, to work on how to be good people. And what does that mean? That means to get along with each other within the culture. And so that is a development of an ethical philosophy, how we should behave, what we should do, and so forth. It includes how we should treat ourselves and what we should practice or engage in. But those are the shoulds. Now, the existential beliefs are like, well, what exists in the universe? Is there a God? Is there not? How many of them are there? And how would one define God? And things of that sort. And that gets into, of course, the existential beliefs that have an effect on how we feel, because many people feel good because they feel like indeed they are obeying God. And then there are many people who feel that are feeling bad because they believe that they are in God's disfavor and cannot redeem themselves and so forth. And so then you have people turning against the religions because of that, and groups forming like leaving religion and so on, and who talk about how religion victimizes people and so forth.
Sure.
And but now I think the realistic thing is that there are good things in the religions and that there are bad things in the religions. And why? Because the creators of the religions have good stuff and bad stuff inside them that gets into whatever they produce.
I don't think it's so much usually the founders so much as it is the folk that come afterwards. as I read foundational documents in almost all the religions, and I admit that probably I know the most about, Christianity and early Christianity and that sort of thing than I do but I've read in a lot of the others, and it's afterwards that a lot of these kind of rules and regulations, come into place because, it's almost a natural tendency to want to institutionalize, I guess. Most of the founders of religions, as I read them, I mean, I don't think Buddha, for instance, wanted to institutionalize Buddhism. And then Buddhism split into these separate sects and all of that. And, like the Mahayanas kind of are in, one kind of position, and the Theravadas are in another. And all of that happens, I think, after these quote unquote founders. I think the founders were kind of enlightened people. They were touching a little bit of this thing I term, reality, and we're trying to communicate that, but you can't communicate it because it's not, to me at least, it's not rational, it's not conceptual, but that's the only way we can talk about it, I guess. But when we start talking about it, you start creating all kinds of confusions, I think.
What is the it?
Well, that's it too. When you say it, you're kind of trying to put it in a box. You're trying to conceptualize it. It is a deep, deep experience that one has, I think. And those who have had that experience, and granted, not everybody has it. I know that. I acknowledge that. But those who have had it can communicate with each other because you're sort of in the same language game, I guess, that Wittgenstein wrote about, these language games. But for those who haven't had, that experience, it's just very difficult to communicate. And language, all language is metaphorical, Bill. Language essentially is metaphorical. I was reading a book by a friend of mine who taught over in, trying to think the name, but anyway, it was a small Presbyterian college over in Western North Carolina. And he wrote a book about that, about, all reality is metaphorical. And I think he's right about that.
Well, wait, let's back up because now we're moving a little bit away from an important distinction that we were talking about.
Right.
You started talking about this experience that some people have and others don't, but the ones that do, they kind of know what each other are talking about and so forth. Okay, many people consider that to be the main thing, the defining characteristic of the religions. And I'm saying that's a mistake.
And I don't think it's a mistake.
So, I know. Okay.
And Mark is probably on the same wavelength as me too in some respects.
Yes. But what I'm saying is that that yes, of course, people share their experiences and so forth. That does go on in the religions. I'm not saying that it does not.
Right.
But of course, not everybody in any particular religion has such experiences.
That's
what I'm saying is that the religion itself, the coming together of people, is not just to have a groovy experience of, I touch the eternal, or however they would put it metaphorically, but instead to work on how to be good people, to get along with each other, to figure out what the right thing is to do. And then, of course, it's like, any particular activity can have more than one purpose or function.
Sure.
And I see the religions as having 5 functions. The most important and the most uh, fundamental to the religions, and therefore not even really talked about much, is ethics. In other words, how should we live our lives? What should we think? What should we try to feel? What should we try to do? How should we get along with each other? How should we decide how to live our lives, et cetera, et cetera? So ethics would be number one. Number two is, I would say, optimism. In other words, how can I feel as good as possible, given that there are things lurking around like what we would call as evil, and or things like death, and the imagining of no longer ceasing to exist or not, and having a better optimistic outlook about the things that otherwise may make us suffer. Okay, so that's ethics, and then optimism. The third is helping. In other words, that the religions do tend to involve helping the disadvantaged and the suffering. And then belonging. It's like some people have no family, but their family has become the members of their religion. And then the fifth one would be entertainment. And that is where music and poetry and art and so forth are included. Now, the thing is, these lower levels are lower because they're not so specific to religion. Because there are lots of ways, lots of organizations you can get into to help individuals that are not designated as religious organizations. And there's, you can develop a family, a set of connections at the local bar, and so on.
Sure.
And
sure.
entertainment, of course, you can do that in many, many ways.
Yeah.
The optimism is certainly one of the key features of the religions, but certainly people can have multiple ways of becoming optimistic without it having anything to do with something that would be tagged religious. But on the other hand, if and I use this example, if I came to a new town and I went up to somebody on the street and said, I'm new in town, I don't have any money, but I want to get together with people to work on how to be as good a person as I can be. Where can I go? Well, the first thing that would come to anybody's mind was, well, there's a church down the street, there's a temple over there, there's a synagogue, there's and so forth. In other words, I would not be told, oh, if you want to work on being a good person, the public library is over there, or there's a good chess club, or everyone just naturally recognizes that that's the primary cultural activity that is there for that purpose. And becoming a good person, of course, has to do primarily with doing that which makes the world a better place, with not just for oneself, but for other people also. So I think, so what I observe is that in any discussion about religions, there is this migration of the discussion away from the issue of ethics into the optimism and the spiritual experiences that people may have and or not have, and so on, and how to obtain them, and how to feel good about one's existence, how to have good experiences.
Yeah, I've found my experience has brought me more into that more ethical sense, in the sense that as I've expressed it before, my experience is that we are all interrelated. We are all we are all one family, and granted that in by religious, organizational religious experience, not everybody in a particular parish or church or whatever has those feelings. But at least for me, that is, that is how I have developed my rational sense, I think. All the religions foundationally speak of this oneness, this unity. Um, and folks say, oh, well, Christianity, they split it up into three different persons in the Trinity and all that. And you can certainly explain some of that theologically and historically, I guess. But in the end, I think, again, certainly even the Christian mystics write of this this oneness, this wholeness, this that we're all in the boat together. And I think if you have that sense, then you develop a lot of shoulds in your own personal life. So I can speak to another without feeling threatened. I had an experience over in Gastonia about a month ago, I guess, and someone and we had been to some music over there, and it was about 11:30, maybe 12 o'clock, I don't know. And we went, the person said, well, come over here. There's this statue over here in downtown. I want you to see that. And we came over there, and there was a park bench there. So we sat on the park bench, and like I said, it was after midnight. And then probably it got to be 1:30, I don't know. And then these two guys came up, and one of them was kind of in a hospital gown or something, and he really looked like he had been through it. Some wounds on him, and then this other guy was with him, and they said they hadn't had anything to eat. Well, normally what I will do in that situation, I don't like to give money because that you don't know exactly what they're going to do with the money. If they're hungry, I'll certainly feed them, but at 1:30 in the morning, I couldn't think of any place, maybe other than driving them over to a Waffle House or something. Well, the other person got real nervous about it all, and I just pulled out a $10 bill and gave it to one of the guys, and they just walked off. Um, and to me, that those two people, yeah, maybe they could have, as my friend said, they could have pulled a knife out and robbed me or whatever. But I just looked on them as just being, part of this grand interrelatedness that is who we are. And I don't know what they thought about it. They probably didn't have that reception often at 1:30 in the morning in downtown Gastonia. But like I told the other person, I said, well, when someone comes up, you have to act in that moment. You don't have time to sit down and do a rational analysis and all. You're just in the moment. And probably 40 years ago, Bill, yeah, I would have been frightened about all that and maybe ran away or something. I don't know. But it's that sense I have that whoever I meet, whoever that might be in the next moment, is my neighbor, is my brother, is my sister. And and I think my religious experience has brought me to that. And I don't understand why some other people in my faith, especially, don't see that. I Because that is certainly preached a lot. Um, But then I think we kind of make excuses. I've seen that. I've seen ministers do this. Speaking about, like the Good Samaritan, and or welcoming the stranger, and then they try to do all kind of rationalizations of why. Well, you need to check them out and do all this stuff. Don't just pick up somebody on the road or whatever. And maybe that's prudent, I guess. But the thing I've found in my, again, religious experience, in my readings in other religions, is that religion is not about the rational and the prudent. It's about, living a life of faith and trust that at the foundational level, love is the reality.
Okay, but what you're describing is what the religion advocates that you should do. That's the ethical aspect of the religions. How should you treat a stranger that comes up to you? How should you try to view the other person? How should you think about other people, and so forth?
But I think too, when we start talking about the ethical, we want to come up with a set of rules.
Okay,
that will apply in every situation, and that's to me, I found that to be possible.
Okay, yes, no, I agree with you about that, but because rules do not necessarily apply in every situation, doesn't mean that there is not something beneficial to having those good rules. In the first place, we're talking about something that is put into language, into words, into sentences. So an ethical principle or rule of conduct would be a sentence, actually. And that sentence is a model of a belief that a person perhaps has, but it's not even aware that the person has it until some situation comes along and activates that belief.
And the problem with sentences, and maybe this is just my study, I guess, of postmodernism and deconstructionism and all that, is that every sentence can be deconstructed in some way. And so, I think they can be, good guidelines, but they're certainly not absolutes. And some people do that. They take a particular rule and they just want to make it some kind of, absolute. And that's, I think, in just lived existence, that's just impossible to do, I've found.
Okay, well, let me share my way of looking at that. Every situation, I think you would agree, is different from every other situation. What one is basically trying to do is to do whatever will result in a good outcome. In other words, if I do this, then it's very likely that this will happen. If I do that, something else will happen. Well, which is the better of the two? However, I arrive at that conclusion. So that is the effort is to figure out what should I do. Okay, now the purpose of ethical principles and rules of conduct is to cause you to stop and think if you are about to do something that usually has a high probability of something going wrong, of having a bad outcome. In a particular case, because of the circumstances, it may be that to follow a usual rule of conduct, ethical rule of conduct, might lead to a pretty bad outcome. so of course, these principles and rules of conduct do not guide us in some absolute way, like whenever such and such situation occurs, this is what you have to do. But it does improve the your ability to not just act on whatever the feelings of the moment are, which can lead a person to do something that makes things worse. Uh, like anger produces hostile behavior, which produces more anger on the other side and
Sure,
more
sure.
hostile behavior back, and so on.
Yeah,
So,
and the thing I found is you can never know in advance, of course, what the outcome is. Going to be what would seem to be, while I'm acting and this is going to create a very good outcome, often, and at least in your own mind, becomes a bad outcome. And then when you live that bad outcome, often that can eventuate in a better, more better outcome. It's very
yeah, that's right.
difficult.
But it is very easy for people to say, well, you never really know. And so, therefore, why bother even thinking about it? But that is, I think, a very incorrect and unfortunate kind of conclusion. We can't know for sure, but we are always dealing with probabilities. So
Sure.
we're trying to figure out, well, what is most likely? What is most probable? What is most probably the thing to do which will have the best total set of outcomes? And all one can do is just do one's best at that. But
Exactly.
it's very easy to say, oh well, all that ethics and everything. It really all depends on the situation, and so why bother even thinking about what ethical principles or rules of
Yeah,
conduct?
and sometimes you have time to think it out. I had a situation where I was asked to support a clemency for someone here in Rock Hill who was on death row, and I had at least an overnight time to think about it and analyze it and say, well, what should I do? And you do have those situations where you can think about it a little bit and all of that, and think about possible outcomes, both for you and maybe for others in the community. But then there are other times when it's just the, and I find myself, Bill, that it is just the moment, and in that moment, you don't have a lot of time to do a whale of a lot of analysis when you're meeting the stranger, and you know um, what do you do, and
Yeah, but
yeah,
let's uh, see it. It would be easy to follow that line of thinking and say, well, therefore, it really doesn't uh, help and doesn't make any difference, to do all of this complicated intellectual stuff of trying to understand. It's just you have to do what you have to do at the moment. But that's not correct. I think I believe, I think in the first place, when one has ethical principles and rules of conduct and does give lots of thought to it, they're thinking about it over and over and over and over and over again, discussing it with people and so forth, and it comes to mind right away. Uh, the belief is there. It doesn't take overnight. Somebody spits in your face, and you want to hit them in the face. But it doesn't take you very long at all to say, well, I should not uh, harm another person even though they attempt to hurt
sure,
me, or
sure.
something like that. The one's ethical beliefs come uh, into action immediately in the moment. But but it
Oh, they do. I mean, you train almost for a lifetime in that,
right,
so that
right.
you have an ethical sense. And some people are more ethically sensitive than others, I find, and that's just, I think, because people are different. There are different levels of, you know, of where they're at about life and these existential beliefs, like you say,
Mm-hmm.
and even ethical beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think too often in our culture, we have kind of come to a thing that, well, if it's, and I see this especially sometimes in the business world, um, if it's not illegal, then it's okay. And now we've even gravitated to, well, it may be illegal, but I'll do a cost benefit analysis. And if I think I can get away with it, then I'll go ahead and do it. I see that amongst my students that I
Mm-hmm.
teach in accounting and stuff, that there's a lot of that kind of thinking about stuff. And
Okay. Well,
yeah.
now you used the term ethical sense,
Mhm.
and let's check.
Intuition, maybe you might call it. Yeah.
No, I would not call it that. So I
No,
was going
you
to
would.
ask you.
No.
No, I would ask you to see what your definition of it is, and then I'll tell you mine. And
Okay. Intuition, and I
no, no,
think that,
no, no, not
uh,
intuition.
ethical
The
sense.
the ethical
Well,
sense.
you develop that over a lifetime. It at least for me, um, and I'm not a universal
Okay, wait,
foundation that
wait,
we can
wait,
all
wait,
agree on.
wait, wait,
But I think
wait,
each one of
wait, wait.
yeah,
You
uh,
you broke up. It all got lost. Can you say it again?
okay. I don't think there is an ethical foundation that we can all agree to, kind of a universal kind of ethical code or whatever. Um, but I think each one of us, in one way or another, has an ethical worldview.
But what is the ethical sense? As you use the term, what do you mean?
What should be the shoulds in our life? What are those things that that we should do? And
Okay, okay. Let me tell you, I have quite
mhm,
a different definition, and I think it is consistent with the thinking of the philosophers who developed the term ethical sense, though I cannot recall who specifically used that. But the ethical sense, I would say, is that motivational state that is produced by at the activation of an ethical belief. In other words, it is my motivation to do what I believe to be the right thing to do. And we know that, I see that motivational state as competing with other motivational states, like, for instance, hunger. So, to use a simplified example, I feel hunger. I want to take that piece of food and eat it. However, I believe I should not do that because it doesn't belong to me.
mhm,
Okay, now, uh, how strong is the hunger and how strong is the belief? How strong is the motivation not to do it that is connected to the belief I should not do it? If the ethical sense is stronger, then one is not going to take the food.
mhm.
If the ethical sense is real weak and the hunger is strong, the person is likely to take the food. And so that's a real simplified example, but in other words, we're presented with motivational states all the time, what we want to do. And some of those things that we want to do, we recognize we should not do. Now, people will vary with regard to the strength of the ethical sense produced by uh, the, uh, the activation of an ethical belief.
Mhm.
So, one person, you might ask them, do you believe what you're doing is wrong? And they'll say, oh, yeah, I know it's wrong. And, well, how do you feel about that? Oh, well, we all do wrong. Everybody
Yeah.
does wrong. you can't always just go, live life of shoulds and so forth. Well, that person has a weak ethical sense. Now, somebody else would make a statement like, well, I can't do that. I think it's wrong. So, of course, I can't do it. You know, so that person would have a strong ethical sense. See,
Yeah,
so
that's
that,
not a bad definition. I mean, a lot of philosophers, I mean, going back in Western tradition to Socrates and Aristotle, and well, Plato and Aristotle, I guess, and some of those. Kant, of course, is kind of the mountain that we, least have to climb it. I think you can't go around it very well. And about the ethical. And yeah, I think some people have stronger ethical sense than others. I think one thing that happens is that when people have shoulds, they invariably, I guess, kind of fall down on their shoulds from time to time. I certainly have, and then it's the problem of that you can have guilt develop. Some religions are a little better at making people feel guilty than others, and I don't think guilt is a good thing. I mean, what I've told people in that situation is, well, yeah, you fall down and then you just get up and you keep, you keep keeping on.
yeah, well, that's an interesting issue there. Also, the
Yeah,
issue of guilt and so on.
yeah, yeah,
Let me kind of quickly convey how I see that. Um, we when we're born, almost immediately in our infancy, we find that some things that we do are rewarded by this entity, mother, let's say, makes me feel good, and other things make me feel bad, and so we're conditioned uh, to be good. We're rewarded for certain kinds of behavior, and made to feel bad um, if we engage in other kinds of behavior, and becomes more and more of that kind of situation as we get our legs and begin to be able to run around and get into stuff and do things that make for problems and so on. Well, we do the same as chimpanzees and bonobos and other apes and so on. We punish children when they don't do what we want them to do, and reward them when they do. And so the bad feelings that are instilled in the individual by the repetitive act of punishment, we would later refer to as guilt. In other words, the person is
yeah,
conditioned to experience the bad feeling if they imagine themselves doing such and such, or if they realize that they've done such and such, and all of a sudden they realize, well, that is against an ethical rule of conduct that I'm supposed to follow or actually believe in, and so on. We internalize the punishing parent, and that we refer to as guilt. And there's also shame, of course. And
yeah.
so these are complex emotions, but they all have to do with this basic kind of authoritarian way of um, building up within each individual a basic ethical philosophy. In other words, the person becomes the child becomes a better and better behaved child, a child who engages in better and better behavior, i.e., behavior that fits in with the culture, doing what is expected and refraining from doing what is not expected or is looked down upon, and so on. So the now I take a position that I think that almost nobody else takes, and that is that we should never punish children, and i.e., punishment meaning making the child feel bad, purposefully making the child feel bad, so the child will suffer because of what the child has done, or whatever. And most people would say, well, that's ridiculous. So the child will run out into the street. The child, but of course, non-punitive child rearing would have to involve very complex learned behavior as an alternative. The natural way is just, as reward and punishment, and teaching and modeling for identification. And so we demonstrate, what's the good thing to do, and so on.
Which I think we do in just our regular everyday lives.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
Meet others, you act in a certain way. Perhaps that influences the other in a, in a more positive way. Yeah, and I think I have found the stronger my ethical sense has become, the less I feel guilty about things. That I can just, you're going to fall from time to time, and you can just let it go.
Well, there's another
I mean, that really the Greek
you broke
term
up.
that
Wait,
we translate forgiveness.
You broke up. You broke up. Say it again.
The Greek term that is translated forgiveness in most English Bibles, aletheia, just means letting go.
Okay,
And,
well, let me stop you. See, you said
yep.
the stronger your ethical sense has become, the less guilt that you feel. Well, I would say that the most the most likely explanation for that is that, well, with the strong ethical sense, it means that that you're always doing, to a great extent, what you believe you should do. So there is not occasion to say, oh, look at what I've done. I really should not have done that. The stronger ethical sense has enabled you to adhere to doing that which is not going to result in bad things happening.
Often, but not always.
Not always. Not always.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. I hadn't thought too much about it, but I think the more ethically inclined you are, I think in that sense, I think the farther away you kind of feel like you are from the ideal, but that's okay, that you're just living out this particular existence at this particular time, and it's sort of all in that kind of grand unity, and that no matter what happens, what we might label good, bad, ugly, joyful, sad, it's just all in that grand unity, is the way I experience it. So yeah, you're gonna, in your own mind, fail sometimes, I guess, but that is just the reality that you live. And I find that I can just most of the time just let those things go and not feel a tremendous amount of guilt. Now, I don't go around trying to do things that might make me feel guilty. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's what you said about the more ethical sense you have, the more apt you are to maybe do what you quote unquote should do, I guess. But yeah, that's kind of been my experience of living this out, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and see, that's what I'm referring to now. We're talking about the situation where one has done something less than optimal, or that has had a bad outcome. Maybe predictably a bad outcome, but one has done it. Now, if one is a child, the standard model of child rearing would be, well, then you've got to make the child suffer, and because the child has violated the appropriate cultural norm or a ethical rule of conduct or a principle or something like that. But in non-punitive child rearing, no, it would be, well, nobody is perfect, so let's work on how to deal with such a situation more effectively if something like it occurs in the future. Uh, the uh, the difference between that authoritarian child rearing and rational ethical child rearing, as I conceptualize it here, where the parent is not the boss of the child, but is the coach in the child's effort to create this person that this child is going to be. In other words, to work on getting better and better and better. Uh, the coach is not somebody who is going to slap the kid down emotionally because they didn't do the right thing. It was just an imperfect effort and so forth, and so helping the child to work on whatever is needed to make something like that not happen in the future. And so the parent would, in authoritarian child rearing, the child would tend to cover up what the child has done because, well, I don't want to get punished. But in the non-punitive child rearing, the child might indeed feel bad, could recognize that, well, something went wrong and so forth, and would want to talk with the parent about it, and that would be a good experience in talking with the parent about it. So a child reared under those circumstances is not going to be hitting his or her head, when they make a mistake. They're going to think something went wrong, and I really had the wrong idea about something. I've got to think this through and maybe talk with some other people about it, and see if I can figure out how to handle such a situation better, and what I can do maybe to clean up the mess that this particular act has caused.
Yeah, because the thing is, I think so many, and I can kind of remember this a little bit with my children as they were growing up. Especially you go in a public place and they start acting out. I mean, it's easy to just, you're kind of embarrassed and all of that. It's easy to kind of lose control sometimes in those situations. I don't think I did very often, but I see that. I mean,
Sure.
you're in the grocery store or something, and a kid's acting up, and the mother's over there, hitting the child or whatever, and that's of course not a good thing.
Or yelling at the child.
Or yelling at the child, and it's just frustration, I guess, often. And some children can be more frustrating than others, especially, in the situation with me. It was with two children that had somewhat some emotional learning difficulties, and that can be frustrating often.
Very difficult. I think
very difficult. Yeah.
Child rearing is probably our technically most difficult task, and yet where's the training? Training program?
We have no training for it, do we?
Right.
You just kind of learn by doing, and I'm hoping that we modeled a pretty good behavior with our children, so that hopefully they pass that along, and we pass that along, and my grandchildren maybe are treated even a little bit better than my children were, hopefully. And but even there, it's hard. It's very difficult raising raising children.
Absolutely.
But I agree with you that negative reinforcement, I mean, I guess you can say it works, I guess, to some degree, but it's not nearly as strong. Even the psychology of it says that positive reinforcement is much more efficient, or gets the behavior that you're desiring better than negative reinforcement.
Well, if in the child's effort to do a good job in this life and so forth, when something bad happens, the child's going to feel bad about that.
Mm-hmm.
The act on the part of the parent to make the child feel even worse, i.e., punishment,
Yes.
is the part that I think is unfortunate. It comes naturally to us. It's built into us, and we have to learn to inhibit it and learn to do something different. And there's no training program, although books are coming out now
Yeah,
that
there's no training.
yeah,
Yeah.
so books are coming out now that are about non-punitive child rearing, but they call them positive discipline, rather than because people won't buy a book that says non-punitive child rearing because they know that was
Yeah.
crazy. So
And then you get into the whole prison system and the
yes,
way we treat people there, knowing they're going to come out, most of them someday. And
mhm,
um, the Europeans seem to have a little better model there than we do, like in Denmark and the Scandinavian countries. I mean, you separate someone from society if you think they're going to be harmful, but you don't punish them per se. I mean,
absolutely,
yeah, they
yeah,
they
yeah.
they
What,
live together in dormitories and cook their own meals and just kind of
yeah,
live a
what,
pretty good life.
yeah,
And
what
there's
that,
nothing wrong with that.
yeah, what that is quarantine. In
Yeah.
other words, a person who is a danger to other people
Hmm.
is isolated, and it's called quarantine.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean the person is bad. They could be quarantined because they have Ebola or something.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
so uh, the so what would follow from that is that, well, this person being quarantined, we should try to give them as good a life within that setting as possible,
Yes.
not make them suffer or drive them crazy by putting them in solitary confinement and so on. And help them to go through a process of reviewing their life, working on their basic ethical philosophy and so forth, and doing something productive, and being able to feel good about it, and then helping them to make the transition back out of quarantine when they were
Yeah.
felt no longer to be dangerous, not because they had stayed 33 years, because that was the sentence,
Yeah.
as if at 33 years the person now is okay, but before 33 years they weren't. That's not the purpose of that. The purpose is to make it a matter of suffering, like okay, you've just lost a third of your life or a half of your life or most of your life. You're going to be behind bars and so forth.
Yeah, the most interesting thing I saw there, I told you about this thing I got involved with about this person up here from Rock Hill who was on death row. He had murdered his next door neighbor. They were both kind of teenagers, and the murderer, he was mentally retarded, and diagnosed as that. And this was before the Supreme Court decision, so he did get the death penalty, and um, and then he goes down to prison and down at Ridgeland, I guess it was. I think that's where death row is now. But anyway, he went down there and got on some medication and got treated, pretty nicely. I mean, in death row, you get a lot of personal attention, I
Mm.
understand, and just became a model prisoner. And then of course he's a changed person, sits on death row about 10 years, 12 years, I don't know, maybe even 15 years. It was a good while. And then we take him out one night and kill him. And at his funeral up here in Rock Hill, prison guards came to his funeral. I mean, he was so well. I talked to several of the prison guards at the funeral, and he said that he was so well liked.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seemed like such a waste to me, Bill. to, I mean,
Absolutely,
yeah, yeah, it
absolutely.
was such a waste. I mean, he could have lived in that controlled environment, and might have eventually have been able to come out of that controlled environment even.
Yes. Yes,
And then,
absolutely.
yeah, and so one night, just because this is what the courts say, um, we just you know take him out and kill him. It just made no sense to me. But
Right. I
yeah,
agree with you. And
yeah,
that's an example of cultural victimization. In other words, the culture believes in that. And part of it is um, that, that people would say that the person deserves the death penalty because they deserve it because, in other words, they must be made to pay for what they have done, i.e., by payment, meaning to engage in a certain amount of horrible suffering.
hmm,
Uh, so it is the motivation of revenge. You have made me suffer, or you have made us suffer, so we will make you suffer even more, and so
yeah,
on. And that whole idea of punishment and revenge, I think, is one of the very unfortunate things that is built into us as a naturally occurring tendency. That's what
yeah.
uh, that's not just us, but chimpanzees, I'm sure, and
And
bonobos do the
and
same thing.
often in those cases, the family of the victim really wants revenge and all that, and I can kind of understand that in some way.
Yes,
But in this case, the mother of the child who was killed did not even want this person executed.
yeah,
Said that publicly,
it's
and
very sad.
yeah, we went to the governor, and because all we were asking for is what's called clemency, and in a death row situation, that just well, commutation, not clemency, commutation, which basically means that he would have gotten a sentence of life without parole, and I thought that was good in the sense that he probably needed that more controlled environment that he had, but he would have come off death row into more of a general prison population, I guess. Um, but yeah, that was a very emotionally draining experience
Yeah, yeah.
trying to get commutation. And the sad thing was is that people up here in Rock Hill who had told me kind of before, that they really weren't for the death penalty, I couldn't get them to stand up.
Mm.
Especially the political class, they would, and I knew that they had voiced that they were not in favor of the death penalty. But when it came down to this town, and they got to run for office, I guess, in this town and all this, they just wouldn't stand up. It was a very disappointing thing.
Yeah,
But
because we humans in general uh, are still relatively, quote, primitive in our thinking. Primitive, primate. In other words, that we are hominids, and we have built into us the tendency to struggle for dominance and to fight, and so on, as well as the other things: uh, mutual grooming, attachment, cooperation, giving and receiving of affection, and so forth, bonding, and so on. Things that promote a good life, but there are these other things that promote a lot of pain, suffering, disability, and early death.
yeah, and I think, like, well, of course, Mark says that we're all eternal beings. Well, that may be true and it may not be true. I mean, you can't scientifically prove that one way or the other, I guess. But if we live as if it's true, and some philosophers have talked about that, living as if something is this, then it changes your whole perspective. I think your shoulds, I believe, do change an awful lot, because you just have nothing to you just have nothing to fear. We get all wrapped up in our ego needs a lot of times, um, and it just makes us this tribal, very individualistic, situation. And I so I mean, I just live my life now, certainly as if that is true, and I think it just gives me a different perspective on the world. It is just one perspective, I agree, in one particular worldview, but I think it
You mean what?
makes me a better person.
That you are an eternal being?
Yes.
I
Well,
see.
that it is just that we are just in this moment, and that's very much a Buddhist kind of thought. It's very much a Christian thought at its kind of foundational level, Jewish, even Islam, that we are that we are um, eternal
In
beings.
other words,
So we have nothing to fear.
that we do not cease to exist just because the body has died.
Yeah, and
Uh,
existence is a very slippery thing. We say God exists. What does that mean
okay.
conceptually?
Yeah.
God
Wait,
exists.
wait,
Of course, you have the ontological argument.
wait.
Yeah.
You broke up again. Repeat what you said, please.
Okay. You have the ontological argument, Anselm's ontological argument that deals with that thing of existence. But
Can you explain it?
well, it's hard. I mean, even to say I exist, does the fact that I exist add anything to the fact that I am and that I'm in this moment? I don't personally think it does, but there's certainly people that do. I find a lot of confusion now with some of my religious friends when I say I'm a atheist. Well, the atheists don't really understand that. I've tried to explain it to some of them, and the theists don't really understand it or seem to sometimes. I just think,
What do you mean by it?
well, I just mean you can't. If you say you're a theist, then it seems to me you're saying that there is some object, the theistic object, and that theistic object has attributes like, you know, God is love, God is all loving, God is all knowing, God is all powerful, and um, and but I just don't think you can put any attributes, and so that's why I'm an atheist. I think there is a divine reality, but it is not objective. It's not like some object, um, out there somewhere that I'm, experiencing or
Okay,
whatever.
let me see if I understand. You're saying I'm not an atheist, I'm an atheist.
Yes.
Now, what is the difference between those two?
Well, I think, as I understand, certainly new atheism, it's basically a reaction against theism. So it's basically a reaction against an objective God. Well, I'm also, but I think where I see a lot of the new atheist anyway is they just say, well, there's just nothing. I mean, there's no, there's there's just no, foundation under anything. It's just that we are like atoms floating around in some, and I don't think that, but also don't think that God is, um, that divine reality is some kind of object. Atheist, basically, a means no in the Greek, and the theos means God in the Greek, and so to say a theist means no objective divine reality, I guess, in my own mind anyway. And I think that differentiates me, say, from the new atheism, as I understand it. Now, Sam Harris seems to me to be maybe a little more on the atheist ground, as I've only read two of his books, but because he seems to think there's a foundation for morality. He seems to be a foundationalist in morality. So he at least thinks there's some grounding for some kind of, foundation for at least our moral actions. And so that would, to me, put him closer to more that atheist view. But the theists, they say, well, no, God has to be something. And I say, well, no, God is a no thing. I mean, I don't know. I probably almost since I can remember, I have not really taken to an objective, some kind of objective person out there. Um, do I experience it often as personal? Well, yes, but I'd almost say it's transpersonal. And
Meaning what?
Well, beyond the personal, it's beyond words, it's beyond rationality, it's beyond concepts, um, and for most people that I talk about, they're just very uncomfortable with that.
So
They want,
it is just a feeling.
well, it's more than a feeling, because a
Okay.
feeling again is um, it sort of makes it sort of individual, I guess, in a way. And I certainly have a strong sense of this interconnectedness.
Yeah.
And one thing I see happening in philosophy, um, especially contemporary philosophy, is this um, real trying to conceptualize this thing of this interrelated web of relationships that we are, that we live in, and so even philosophy is coming more, at least as I have experienced, and had some courses in it, and we see this too in the whole thing of globalism. I think that's a metaphor, globalism, for these interconnected webs. I mean, the World Wide Web is an interconnected web. The global financial system is an interconnected web, and so I think that's going to draw us closer together over time. Now, granted, right now it can seem a little polarized out there, but you can't have a global, network and all this without everything else that comes with that, I think. And I
Yeah.
think,
And my way of looking at that is that we are tribalistic, but we're moving more and more to regarding our species as being our tribe rather than our
yes,
local group or our nation or stuff like that.
yeah,
And
because,
in other words, feeling like we're all in this together,
yeah,
we need to be a unified species. Of course, we're far, far from that.
but we
And
live that reality. I mean, the European Central Bank today essentially lowered interest rates, making them even more negative there, and started a quantitative easing program. And that's going to affect everything. That's going to affect American banks, American financial decisions, and certainly Chinese, and all of it. It's just, you can't do something and just have it isolated to your own country. We see this with the whole tariff thing going on.
mhm.
And we're just so, these supply chains and stuff are so interrelated, and it speaks to, metaphorically, I think, this reality that has always been there. I think we've always been interrelated. We just haven't always recognized it. But folks that have founded various, world religions, they have had that sense. So that sense has been around forever almost. But
Well, I think I see it a little bit differently. Um, I think if we go back thousands of years,
mhm,
what we did within our tribe was not likely to have any effect on the neighboring tribe or two or three tribes over, you know. But as we have developed first our language capabilities and our increasing ability to communicate with each other in wider and wider areas, geographic areas, and then with our technology, we're able to instantaneously communicate with people on the other side of the earth. Then what happens in my household may actually have an effect on the other side of the earth. and
Well, sure.
and so, but that's a development that has occurred for
Well,
our
it's a
species.
development understanding. But then, how do you explain someone like Buddha, who was even, certainly predates Christianity and predates a lot of Judaism, because Judaism really didn't come into play really until the
Mhm.
Babylonian exile, really in the
Yeah.
500
Well, how do we explain what
BC.
about Buddha?
Well, having that sense of that interrelatedness. I mean, when you read, Buddhist writings. Now, granted, I'm not reading them in the Sanskrit. I'm reading them in English, a translation,
Yeah.
but they're
Uh-huh.
just full of that, of this
What
interrelatedness.
would be an
That
example? The kind of
um,
thing.
what
Kind.
kind of thing? That that.
Okay. Wait.
Uh,
Wait. You broke up. Wait. Wait.
well, it's that
Wait.
whole thing
Wait.
again about
Wait. Wait.
yeah,
You broke up. You broke up. Can you repeat?
yeah, yeah, it's sort of that idea again about the next person I meet is I'm related to that person, whether that person's of my tribe or not of my tribe. I'm related.
Yeah. But
I'm related to nature. I'm related
well,
to all
wait. Wait.
reality.
Wait.
Yeah.
Meeting that person that one has met.
Mhm.
They're in the same place. It's not like the person has an effect on somebody on the other side of the world, unless they're communicating, electronically. So,
Well,
but
yeah, you had that sense of, well, certainly, Buddha's world was certainly probably smaller than our world, but it was again that sense of that, and you see that in Judaism. I mean, welcoming the stranger. Um,
mhm.
so you welcome the person and the hospitality to the to the stranger. You know, um, Looking in Christianity, the metaphor in the Gospel of John is that we are you know um, you know the vine and the branches. That whole thing of we're all you know we're all connected. We're all interconnected. Now,
Yeah,
granted,
but the stranger that is being talked about is somebody that's a few feet away from you. That you've just met. It's um, so. I mean, I'm in agreement with you that increasingly, what any one of us does can have effects over a wide sphere of influence, like
hmm
what you and I are doing right now, may have some effect on the other side of the earth.
sure, sure.
If we're lucky that Humanianity takes off, or people do listen to our
hmm
the Humanianity conversations,
Yeah.
but that's something new that has developed, and so it wasn't that way back in the Buddha's time, and
But the writings, as you read them, are universe. I mean, they are. Yeah, they're speaking out of certainly written out of particular cultural
uh,
context and all of that. But they, as I read them, and then maybe it's because I'm reading them more in this environment now. But as
yeah,
I
yeah,
read them, they speak to this universal nature of of reality, that we all are one, and that we all are interrelated.
yeah.
So
See,
that
that's pretty metaphorical. We
oh,
all
and of
are
course,
one.
all religious
Yeah,
language, Bill, by its very nature,
yeah.
is metaphorical, not
Okay,
conceptual.
okay,
It's one
but
thing that happened to Western
right,
philosophy
right. No, no, I
when
understand.
you had Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and back then in the ancient Greeks, philosophy was a way of life. It wasn't
Okay,
some discipline that you learn concepts about. It
but
was about a way of life. Yeah,
let's go back for a
and
minute
we've
here.
lost that in
Wait,
philosophy,
wait.
of course. Yeah.
Let's go back.
hmm
A statement like "we are all one,"
hmm
uh, that is metaphorical, but it is
Mhm.
it is indeed a way of saying something which probably could be
Sure.
said differently and have more specific meaning for people.
Oh, we
So,
think so, yeah. I mean, we want to put everything into a concept because we want to control it. We want to have it in the box, and I've got the box, and now I understand it, and all of this. And this kind of, I mean, reality just can't be put into concepts. I mean, we certainly, I've done that as well as the best of them, I guess, in religion classes and philosophy classes and that
well,
sort
I
of
would
thing.
like to, yeah, I would
Yeah.
like to give us a chance to take something like "We Are All One"
Hmm.
and um, try to capture the more specific technical meaning of that. And I know that that doesn't sound good. It's because
Because you're still going to be dealing with metaphor.
for many people, the speaking poetically is gratifying and so forth, even though there may be very little agreed upon meaning because the poetry means different
Sure,
to
sure,
different
to
people.
different people.
But we are all one, I think, can be made more understandable. Um, uh, that it is referring to uh, that in the first place, we are all, quote, in the same boat, to use another metaphor, namely, we are alive,
Sure, sure,
and
sure.
we have a lot of similarity in that we can feel joy, we can feel sadness, we can feel anger, we can feel pain, we can feel hunger.
Hmm.
We are very similar to each other. Secondly, that uh, we do have a tendency to treat each other um, not necessarily equally, in some cases equally, but like if we're in the same tribe, if we're in the same family, and so forth, and we have a concern not just for the self, but for the self of the other person,
Hmm.
and so forth. And so, mutual concern um, in that other people can suffer just as we can, and so forth. And then
Yes,
another thing that there is a benefit to thinking that way, as opposed to being what might be labeled as narcissistic. Well, I'm the most important person in the world, or I'm what counts, and so forth.
yeah,
Um, and maybe we are all one. Maybe it has to do also with well, if something when something good or bad happens to a particular person, that
hmm,
can have an effect on other people also. So
sure,
that set of events is happening not just to the one person, but to a wider range of people. So the extreme of that would be, it happens to everybody. Um, but um, uh, but so the we are all one is, I think, interpretable in those ways. But it may, for instance, in your mind, when you say we are all one, it may refer to something else, but I don't know what it is. We could try to work on putting that into words if I
sure.
have not grasped the meaning of this metaphorical statement.
Yeah, and I guess we're always language is just inherently metaphorical. We
Mm-hmm.
we want it not to be, I think, sometimes. um, but it is. It. I think the postmodernists are right about that. I know you disagree with the postmoderns a little bit. I don't. I don't cotton to everything they write, but I think they're right about that. That language is extremely slippery, and
I agree.
yeah, and you can't. You try as best you can to come up with concepts because you have an experience. Okay, I have an experience. I have in my mind, and then I might try to communicate that. I might speak it, I might write it, but it's never going to be my experience. It's going to be a translation into some kind of concept, either orally or in writing, or maybe even body language can communicate. And but it's always going to be an imperfect um, communication. But as I
Well,
tell people, it's the best we've got.
yeah, well,
So,
what we're talking about is one person imagining what it's like to be the other person at a particular time. People say, gosh, it's hard for me to imagine what you were going through. Or, yeah, I know how you felt. I feel the same way just thinking about it, and so forth. So it has to do with the empathy and the reproduction of the feeling state in oneself that one believes is in the other person. Well,
yeah,
the other person uh, produces that by putting into words words that kind of make oneself imagine act to a greater or lesser degree of accuracy how the other person is feeling by virtue of the words that have come from that person. Um, and
yeah. I was very taken with folks like Husserl, the what's called phenomenology.
mhm,
I was very, because what he wanted to do, what Husserl wanted to do originally, was to again look at inner experience, the phenomena, and somehow capture that in some kind of scientific way. And I think he found out over time that that was almost impossible um, to do. But I'm very fascinated with his writings of attempting, um, to do that, because most of us, and myself included, I guess, are not very introspective. I mean, we just kind of live life up on the surface. We're all kind of, in a way, Bill, I think, kind of tiptoeing through the graveyard,
mhm,
because we all are there. I mean, the one
mhm.
thing that we can know with a good deal of insurance, not probability, is that we're all going to die. And that's a common universal experience that ties all of us together. Now, how do
Mhm,
we deal with that?
mhm.
And there are different ways people come up with, but I think that's the ultimate existential. Um,
Mhm.
Using that term in more the way the
Yeah.
existentialist, that's the ultimate
Mhm.
kind of what Jaspers call the wall which we come up against, because it just doesn't fit into any kind of rational, you know, pattern. I mean, it is just
What doesn't? What doesn't?
the fact that we're all going to die. And
Why does that not fit into a rational pattern?
Well, it's just not rational. I mean, for most, I mean, it is kind of the ultimate irrationality. I mean, here we
Well, see,
are.
I don't understand that because
Yeah.
uh, I have learned from early in life
Hmm.
that we are all going to die, and indeed have seen death
Sure.
occur over and
Sure.
over, and that everybody talks about who has died and whether a person is going to die this year or next, and so on. So, uh, to me, uh, it is rational to assume that the evidence that it's consistent with the evidence that indeed I'm going to die also.
Yes.
To me, it's rational, not irrational.
And to me, it's irrational. I mean, and
Why? Why?
to all the existentialists, it's irrational. Well, because it's kind of an ultimate boundary situation. It's just one you can't conceptualize. You can't even put it into poetry very well. I've tried to write about it. I have spent 25 years, Bill, writing a stream of consciousness short story about a man dying of melanoma, to try to in some degree encapsulate what that's all about. And and maybe it's because I haven't had that experience. I've had some pretty close
Mm,
experiences in the last 2 years, so I can get a little better at it than I was 25 years ago, I guess. But yeah, and it's just one that um, that um, in our culture, especially, we just don't often handle very well.
Well, I
I,
agree we don't handle it very
yeah,
well,
yeah,
but it would be, in my mind, irrational for me to believe that I was never going to die. Now, there's a separate question, and that is whether this, quote, consciousness is going to survive the
exactly,
death
yeah.
of the body and so on.
Mhm.
And that gets into uh, something that is covered in the mind-body problem in some detail, but is very difficult to get across, and that is that consciousness is a supernatural phenomenon. It is not anywhere found in the natural sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, and so forth. It is, we have reports of consciousness, but
Well, that's interesting because I'm reading an article. I haven't read it. I just pulled it down, but it's an article on trying to explain consciousness using the Priam bomb interpretation of quantum physics. It's by a PhD and all that, and I haven't read it yet, but I do want to read it. Um, and
that's a
certain.
very that's a very frequent um, phenomenon these days. That in order to seem consistent with the natural sciences, people make metaphoric use of the of terms that have technical meaning in the fields of study, like quantum mechanics and relativity and so forth. And for instance, Mark talks about whether we have a particle-based reality or a wave-based reality and so forth. And but I know that he does not know, it does not understand quantum mechanics, and I'm trying to learn that, uh, but I'm very, very early, and one of the first things uh, that the instructor is told, this is online, is now you can't, do not try to visualize this. Do not try to imagine this. We're dealing with essentially purely mathematical terms and so forth, and applying them to measurements that we make. So actually, quantum mechanics is a mathematical model to
It is.
explain the results of experiments, the results, resulting measurements derived from experiments, which
Yeah.
enables us then to predict on a wider basis what will happen. It makes us able to make quantum computers somehow, and I have no idea what that what that
Yeah,
means, but
and then the quantum physicists, then they have various interpretations of it because you get down again that it's all metaphorical. I
yeah,
mean, a scientific formula is really metaphorical. It's a schema.
it's a model.
Yeah, it's a model, and that's a metaphor. A model is a metaphor, essentially.
Well, no,
Uh, it is like
wait,
this. It is like that. Yeah.
wait. Though,
If you
I
go, yeah.
I think uh, I don't think that it is, quote, just a metaphor. I think model can be defined, and that is that a model is an entity that has characteristics which allow one to predict the characteristics of the entity of which it is a model. So a model car, if it is an accurate model, will enable you to identify the real car because it has the same characteristics.
Well, you're saying the model car is like
That's
the
correct.
yeah, and
That's correct.
that's a simile essentially. Yeah, in
Well,
English.
well,
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
That's the term for the linguistic use
yeah,
of the
yeah,
term. Yeah,
yeah,
but still, a model car. Well, I also use, like in the book, if a rock rests in mud and the mud dries, and then the rock somehow is taken out,
Mm-hmm.
okay, the mud is a model of the surface of the rock, and the surface of the rock is a model of what's in the mud.
Yeah,
So,
but
uh,
it is neither one. So in the sense of
right,
your comparison, it's well, it's like this, it's like
yeah, well,
that.
the model is
Yeah,
not the same as that which it is a model of.
yeah.
Correct, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that that's a fairly satisfactory. But see, then uh, a um, a model, a sentence can be a model of a belief that a person has, or when one looks at an object, then what one sees, that 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 thing that the person is seeing, is a model of what is there in reality. But what is there in reality is never seen. It's just the perception of it. And
Yes,
so all of our experience is presumably a model of, quote,
exactly,
reality,
exactly.
that is behind the curtain, and
Yep.
we'll never see what's behind the curtain. We'll just say, well, this model seems to work pretty well. It's kind of like this, and it's even more like this, and so forth, and not very much like that. And we get answers from the person behind the curtain. That's
Yeah,
pretty good, but
yeah, and see, we're uncomfortable. I mean, even Plato was uncomfortable with that.
yeah.
So we got to have, well, we've got a tree. Well, it's not the real tree. It's, there's some ideal tree, which it is a model of. And, because we want, I think it's,
Well, now there, the what he's referring to, I think, is what the meaning of the word tree is, but not the specific tree, like that tree there. Um,
well, what is the essence of tree? I think is what, if you read Plato, I mean, that's what trying to get at, what is the essence of, and of course, Plato was an idealist, and
uh-huh.
then Aristotle was more of what is called realist.
Okay, well, what do we mean by essence?
Um, the,
I'll tell you what I think.
the substance, the being, the
Yeah, and see,
reality of the tree. Yeah.
yeah, and I would say something different. I would say that it is that um, uh, that which is essential to the definition of it. Um, that
And that's very Aristotelian, but that's
uh,
not Platonic. Yeah.
well,
Plato was more the
I
ideal.
worry about being put into the Aristotelian box and being put up on the shelf.
Oh yeah, I know. We hate being put in boxes, don't we? Yeah, we have a tendency always to
Yeah,
do that.
yeah.
But what you're saying is more that kind of what's called a realist nominalist approach as opposed to the idealist approach of somebody like Plato, I guess.
Well, there's another thing, just because we can make up a word and a definition doesn't mean that there's anything that corresponds to it.
Exactly.
And also, like I use the example, like in the Mind Body Problem book, that you see two people. There's a man there and there's a woman there. Okay, that's two entities, a man and a woman, and
Mm-hmm.
you find out that they're married. Oh, that they are a married couple. Oh, and now we have a third entity. But see, that's not that is an entity that exists by definition only.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And so we can try to divide up things that exist by definition only, uh, and those things that actually exist, uh, meaning that I and somebody else can point to it in some way, point to it visually or call attention to it.
Yeah, and then we have that thing of adding some attribute called existence, which I think is, and most philosophers have thought that's very
Yeah,
problematic.
it's a linguistic trick.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so better not to say something exists. Although I guess Descartes, he tried to boil it down to well, I know that I, Descartes, exist, so I can say I'm experiencing or thinking. So I think, therefore I
Yeah,
am.
but there is a problem with that. In the first place, he
Oh, it
hasn't.
is a big problem. Yeah.
Yeah, he has not defined the word I,
Yep.
and also has not defined the word exist. And of
No,
course,
no.
that will that any of our putting anything into language, there is that issue of, well, what do those words mean under those circumstances? And so it's a when children are growing up, they don't learn precise technical definitions of everything. They gradually learn that oh, well, this is a table, but this over here is not a table, and so on, and
Hmm.
just gradually learn what what are called tables and what are not called tables, and so on. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and language just creates our world. I mean, without language, there's not a world as we. I mean, I guess there would still be experience, maybe, but it would not be. I mean, to say there's a table, there's a chair, you can't really do that. I don't think without language, and so the
well, no,
fact,
you can't say
yeah,
things without language. That's
yeah,
what language is.
or
But
even
it's
think things without language. I mean, it would
well,
just be undifferentiated stuff.
I would
Yeah,
disagree.
yeah.
I think dogs and cats are precisely aware of various objects, like a mouse or
Yeah,
a
well,
bone or something.
one of my beloved philosophy professors, who said one day in class, he said, well, just think for a minute, just look around the room. And if you didn't know the word, if you didn't know that was a wall, if you didn't know this was a desk, if you didn't know that I'm your philosophy professor, wouldn't it just be all just a bunch of just undifferentiated stuff? You would have no way to
No, it would not be.
conceptualize it.
Because we differentiate. We can teach a rat to differentiate one thing from another very, very easily in just a minute. And
Oh yeah, you
so,
can teach people to do that, but if you go back
well,
and just
life teaches.
yeah, well it
We,
does. So it's very difficult to imagine that, but I did because he asked me to do it, and I respected him a lot. Still do, in fact, to some degree. Uh, and I just started looking around the classroom, and I said, "Well, yeah, if I didn't know that was a wall, it would just be some white space or whatever. It wouldn't have any conceptual."
yeah, but
And
it
I
would
don't,
be exactly the same thing, and you'd know that you
yeah,
couldn't walk through it.
but I wouldn't know it as a wall. I would just.
All that means is that yes, you're removing language.
Mhm.
If you remove language, then of course you can't use language to
Exactly.
point at,
So
but
so
that's
it's just stuff. It has no. I mean, yeah, you might say, well, maybe I get up and go over and touch it or something.
no,
Uh,
you
but
would know that.
I wouldn't even know what that was. Yeah, I wouldn't even know what
But
that was.
it depends on what you mean by know what it is. If you
And,
mean put it into words, no, if you don't have
uh,
language. But that doesn't mean that a dog cannot see the bone tossed and run and get it and bring it back and so on without saying this is a bone and it landed 20 feet away and so on. No, the dog, but that doesn't mean that the dog is not having precise experience. Um,
yeah, you have the experience, but if you don't have the language, you can't package that experience in any way.
you can't package it in
Yeah,
language.
yeah, and in concepts, you don't have a concept of chair. You don't have a
What is
concept.
Well, I think I think that a dog has a concept of other dogs and people and so forth, and it's going to respond to a person different than a tree.
Yeah, I don't know. It was a very interesting, and I actually came home after that class and kept doing that. It was so
Uh-huh.
interesting to kind of, because I mean we just put all this stuff into boxes. You know, this is a chair, this is a
Yeah.
computer,
Hmm.
this is a book, and
We label
we
things.
label. Yeah, we
Yes,
label,
yes. And
and
that's a very effective tool. Language is a
it is,
tool.
it is.
Uh,
Yeah,
but even before we had language, we still uh, captured food and ate it and did all sorts of other things that
yeah,
required pretty precise knowledge, uh, you know, the knowledge not put into words, but the knowledge of how to throw a spear, the knowledge of what will happen if I bite into this,
yeah.
what will what will happen if I
It,
hit this other
right. It
entity.
was because it was interesting. I had never thought too much about philosophy and philosophy. I don't know why I took this intro. I guess because I thought I was going to go to seminary, thought it might be helpful. And, from that moment on, I said, this philosophy stuff has has a lot of interesting stuff.
It
So
does,
that was
absolutely.
probably the moment I became, well, I don't consider myself a professional philosopher, I guess. I mean, sort of a shade tree philosopher, I guess, but I became very interested
Yeah, yeah,
in the study of philosophy. I took
yeah.
every philosophy course at Winthrop, and then went on to do graduate study too.
Uh-huh.
But it was almost from that moment of kind of, um, and it's interesting that we've taken philosophy and sort of made it an academic discipline and all of this, and that just wasn't what certainly the original Greek philosophers were all about. They saw it as a way of life. You
Yeah,
basically
yeah.
got apprenticed into philosophy,
Hmm.
and we've changed that
Well, it's
somewhat.
the pursuit of understanding, the pursuit of
Hmm.
deeper understanding of seeing uh, new relationships
Yes.
and having an accurate picture of relationships and
Hmm.
the what we refer to as causation and so forth, which is
Yeah,
a complex term.
it's like no other academic um,
Yeah,
discipline I ever took. It's nothing like the biology and chemistry and physics and math that I had.
yeah,
It's just and maybe I'm biased because I really like it, but it's
yeah.
almost that it's just something to itself. Really, it's hard to package it into a university system, I think, because
Hmm.
you have the philosophers, and the philosophers are supposed to just do this philosophy stuff, and but
Yeah, it's
philosophy,
like the practical applications are not there,
yeah,
and so
yeah,
it you are not learning to do a job, for instance, or
yeah.
you're not learning some kind of useful set of procedures to do something. Instead, you're analyzing language, which I think is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that uh, it's a way of increasing the understanding of the self and of our interpersonal interactions with each other, how
Mm-hmm.
we use words and so on. Because once we developed the tool of symbolic language, then we started doing what hominids do in our unique human way, using our words and becoming much more able to cooperate with each other and to empathize with each other.
Well, I thought it was interesting. Again, my philosophy professor. There was only one professor teaching philosophy when I was there. But anyway, he said that the first day of class, he said, some of you in here will make A's in this class, but it doesn't mean you're a philosopher. And he said
Right.
some people will make C's and maybe even D's, and you'll be a philosopher. I thought that to be I had to think about that a while too, because you think, well, taking these courses about, getting some proficiency and getting a grade that shows your proficiency. And philosophy is just not like, I mean, we had, I mean, I've seen students, I've taught students who, um, yeah, they can do the test and stuff and do that, but do they think philosophically? Well, not really.
I
Yeah,
guess if you get a C or a D, you have to be sort of philosophical about it.
yeah, you have to be philosophical about it, but it is just seeing the wonder. Now this is me again, but to me it was just seeing the wonder of life and existence and thinking about it and
Mhm.
really thinking deeply about it and
Yes, yes,
drinking it in great dregs and
yeah, yeah.
it's like nothing else you do. I mean, I was fascinated with calculus,
Uh-huh.
uh, and those when you would, especially when I got into the third semester and we dealt with XYZ coordinates and you were deriving formulas for spheres, and I found that to be quite fascinating,
Hmm.
but not in the way I found philosophy.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, it's a very interesting discipline, and again we put it into academic departments, but it originally really wasn't. I mean, it was almost like a religion in
Hmm.
the sense that you would be apprenticed, and like the Pythagoreans. I mean, that was certainly a type of religion, I guess, and you were apprenticed, and you had rites of initiation and all of that into the philosophical group you were in or
Now it's
whatever.
interesting how you're using the word religion, like a religion, and so forth.
A way of
Meaning,
life, I guess. Yeah.
uh, yeah, well, it certainly is a subculture that one gets into where, yeah, we can communicate with each other and understand each other better than better than others can understand us who are out there who have not gone through this acculturation um, process of learning these new words and how to connect them together in definitions and sentences and so on.
Yeah, and there are definitely technical terms in philosophy, like any other
Yeah,
discipline.
yeah.
Yes, especially in more the logical positivist kind of way of looking at things. There's a lot
Now,
of
by
technical
technical,
terms.
would you mean precisely defined?
Yeah, that in that particular discipline,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yeah,
right.
that would have a particular meaning in that
Because
discipline.
outside of that discipline, people may use the same words, but it's not necessarily with the same meaning.
Yeah,
But
not the
but
same meaning.
within this particular um, sphere, um, then the word is has this specific defined meaning, and then
Yes,
of course all definitions are going to be somewhat problematic because any definition is made up of words, and each of those words then has to be defined, and so there's
yeah,
it is a
it's a never-ending task.
yes,
But that's one thing philosophy, if anything, it taught me was how to be like when I'm writing a brief to the Internal Revenue Service to defend my client's position, to be very, very precise, to be
yeah,
able to go to the law and, to do all of that, very well. But then when I'm sitting,
technical, no poetry.
exactly, but I'm a poet at heart.
Yeah, yeah.
So my philosophy has always been a little bit poetic. So I
Mm.
loved the existentialist, and the problem now is that the existentialists have largely become passe. They were never really liked in American philosophy that much. They were seen as being a little too poetic and French, and
Mm.
not with their feet on the ground. Sort of. I mean, I found that when I was down at USC. Um, we only had one kind of existentialist professor there. Even he was, not of the French school. He was a big Heidegger expert, but
Mm.
so it had that German influence. But yeah, I was always a little bit poetic, even even down in a graduate program in philosophy. But I got through it. It was they accepted. That was one thing I liked about philosophy. There were no right or wrong answers. If you could put something down and defend it in a logical, rational way, you could wax poetic. I mean,
yeah. Whereas in the sciences and mathematics, there are right and wrong answers.
There are right and wrong answers. Yes, you find that out on tests. But in philosophy, it was just writing mostly. I mean, the philosophy professor I had for intro philosophy, same professor at Winthrop, he offered kind of a multiple choice kind of approach to the students, and most students took that approach. But he gave another approach, is I'm going to give you these books to read, and you just write answers. You just write about it. You answer my questions. And I chose that because, and I think I learned a lot more than the people that did the multiple choice. I mean, to me,
it's a little harder to grade you, though, I guess.
Yes, it took time. So I guess he was glad that not too many other people took that option, but he did give that option. And how do you even give a multiple choice? I mean, factual question, I guess, or something, but it really doesn't. To me, it doesn't, quote unquote, test your philosophy. I think the writing thing, it better test, whether you're a budding philosopher or not, maybe. But most students took the multiple choice route because most students, they don't like to write. I mean, that's what
the question is, I guess one question comes to mind, is there a way of integrating the two so that because there is value in both the poetic and the technical and so on. And we've gone over a couple of hours. And
we have. Yeah, it just seems like the time flew by again.
Yeah.
But very interesting. Because words are just, and the use of words and concepts, it's a very interesting thing that we just do on a daily basis and don't even think about it.
Right.
And our language is often a little imprecise. And I admit I wax a little poetic sometimes, but it is the best I've been able to do in my own kind of trying to get understanding around some of these things to do. Just to kind of wrap up, one thing that I've been fascinated with is stream of consciousness in literature. Like Faulkner wrote a lot of stream of consciousness novels, and
I think
he wrote one called The Sound and the Fury, and it was the stream of consciousness of a very mentally challenged young man. And I have wanted to, and I haven't been very successful at this yet, but I've wanted to write a stream of consciousness short story or maybe even novel about someone who is experiencing dementia, because I don't have any hard scientific evidence for this, but I just feel like there's something inside. I'm using poetic again, inside outside, but there's a reality that's there that can't be expressed very well. In talking to people with developing dementia, that's what I hear from them. Steve, I thought this and I just couldn't get it out, very quickly. And what is that experience like? And as it develops and that person becomes more and more distant as far as how we experience them, what is going on there? I thought about that with my wife when she was lying there in intensive care, unconscious for the last week and a half. What was going on there? And that is just fascinating. But I haven't been able to, I can put down the stream of consciousness of the guy dying of melanoma. I mean, I think I'm pretty good with that, although not where I want it yet. But that thing of because that is something that people, I mean, even the scientific community is very puzzled about all that.
Well, the way that I have put it is you can't get to the moon and back with poetry, and you can't make love with definitions.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. There are no definitions for love, are there?
So,
I've been trying for the last 6 months
yeah,
to put
yeah,
that into definitions, and it's just
yeah,
impossible. Just impossible. You're right about that. Yeah, and I guess we can't get to the moon with
yeah.
poetry. We can get to the moon with metaphor, with these schema, the models and all of that. Yeah, but
Precisely defined.
precise. But then we can never precisely define anything. I don't think. I mean, it's
Because
always,
of the, yeah, right.
yeah, because of the
But that
nature of
doesn't,
language.
yeah, but we can do it to a greater or lesser extent, and with significant utility. So witness the fact that we got to the moon and back, although some people believe
Yeah,
that we didn't.
we didn't. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so
What? Let me ask this real quick.
okay.
Have you ever done one where it's more than just you and another? Maybe you've gotten three people. Two other people together, or you can do that through Skype, can't you? Kind of
Yes,
conference in that way.
yes,
Uh,
I've thought about doing that. The problem is, it is the more people you have, the more fragmented the discussion is. It goes off in all different directions. Just you and I, uh, our conversation has wandered. Not that we,
oh, sure. Yeah.
not that we had a specific agenda where we were going to, deal with a particular issue, but there would be times when, for instance, you would say something and I would want to respond, but you were in the middle of saying something more complex and everything,
Yeah.
and I was thinking, when can I intervene and get us back to this, that, and so on. So, and probably as I talk, you're thinking about such and such, and saying, well, when he stops talking, then I'll be able to say such and
Yeah.
such,
Yeah. You do that.
and so.
Yeah, I was just thinking it would be fascinating to do something like that with Bork, especially after I finished his book. I'm about 3/4 through it,
Uh-huh.
and I don't know if he'd be. I could talk to him about it. I think that might be. Have you read his book yet? Have you got
No,
a
I
copy?
have not.
Okay.
I read a few pages of uh, his earlier book, I believe, but the thing is, he lives in an entirely different world than I do, and he makes assumptions that, for me, are assumptions that I have never made.
Sure. Sure.
And he starts with a foundation that is somewhat foreign to me, but it is interesting that the whole phenomenon, and he's very conscientious about being open to skepticism
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
critical
Very
review and
much
so
so.
on, and
Very
that's
much
that's
so.
excellent. So,
Yeah.
well, listen,
Okay.
we probably
Yeah, I
have,
got to get ready to go to some music tonight. So
yeah, there you
here
go.
in Rock Hill, I don't have to drive to Charlotte. So
Yeah, so
that's good, at least. Yeah. So
well, this was a good discussion, and
it was, and it worked
hopefully,
technically pretty well.
yes,
I got an offer today from Comporium. I don't think it's the fiber stuff, but it's called Ultra Internet, and it gives
gosh,
you 90 megabytes per second more speed than what I've got now. So I don't know if I'll try that or not. For 3 months, you actually get it cheaper than what I'm paying for the grade I've got now. So I may do that and see if that even improves it better.
yeah,
But I thought overall this worked. We had
yeah,
a couple of breakups, but
yeah,
nothing really major like we've had in the past. So it may have been a good bit that older computer. So I think this will work a lot
yeah.
better. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Okay.
so as not to bore our listeners, we might
Yes, yes,
as
yes.
well.
All these technical
Yeah, yeah.
problems.
Okay, so this has been good, and we'll plan on a future one where we get even further into the mysteries of life and philosophy and existence and so on.
There you go.
Okay,
Okay. Well, I guess if not before, we'll probably maybe see you on Sunday, I guess, at the
uh-huh.
Episcopal Church. Okay. So,
Yeah, good.
okay. Well, have a good rest of the day
You too.
and the weekend and all your ballroom dancing and everything. So, okay.
Okay, take care.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.